Hi students, we're here for week 7 of our group collaboration. This week I'm going to talk about how to write a results or a discussion section, and what you're going to be doing is taking your results section that you've written for your survey or for your experiments. You're going to look at what are the main findings that you take home from the results, and then we're going to start talking about main findings in terms of how we would write those in the discussion, and then we think about how the main findings apply to real life kinds of experiences. Okay, so that's what we're looking at in a discussion section, just for the first part of it anyway. All right, I'm going to take what we wrote in an example on the survey that I had discussed back when we were learning how to do results. And so we had a 39 item survey. We removed 5 items from that survey to get adequate reliability, okay? But that's not important, right? We were testing a hypothesis. Would older children show increased risk scores than younger children on this survey during the COVID-19 pandemic? Okay, that was the first hypothesis that we were going to test. And so we did an independent samples t-test, and it in fact did show that older children had higher risk scores on this survey than the younger children, okay? And that was significantly different. So the first thing I'm going to write in the discussion section for this survey is that older children seem to be at more risk than younger children. Okay, older children seem to be more at risk than younger children during the COVID-19 pandemic, as evidenced in let me double space this. As evidenced in the survey results. Okay, so that was our first main finding. Now, how does that apply to real life? Well, it's pretty easy to sort of read through that, right? Older children, based on whatever the survey items were, show risk factors that make them more vulnerable, I guess, during the pandemic, okay? So let's see, risk factors, the risk factor on the survey was composed of questions that, and I don't know, I haven't seen the survey, I just saw the results. But here you would fill in the blanks. What were some of the questions that related to risk, okay? And so I'll just put a blank here because I don't know. I'd have to go back to the survey and read these risk factors and talk about each of those. The risk factor on the survey is composed of questions that, asked about blank, blank, and blank. Okay, and then we would talk about how these questions apply to the real life behaviors of older children. Okay, so I can't write this without the the survey questions, and I'm sorry for that, but in your notes, if you're taking them, and I hope you are right now, you want to make sure that you talk about the questions that were on your survey if you did survey research. And then how do those questions apply to real life in terms of whatever you're studying, okay? So I'm just going to put in parentheses just for a note, in real life. Okay, how do your findings apply to real life experiences? Okay, and then we also did some correlations here. And one of the items that we found on the correlation was that kids or children who did not have internet at the home, in the home, had decreased adaptive and protective scores on this survey. All right, so a second main finding in this survey study showed that children who did not have internet, is it capital? I don't know, access in their home showed decreased adaptability and protective factor scores. All right, so you want to list out the main finding, then the second main finding. You're going to talk in detail, right, about the items on the survey that related to these things, and then you're going to talk about in real life, you know, what does this mean, okay? So again, I'm just going to say the adaptability factor was measured by questions such as, and then you give examples, all right, and then the protective factor was measured with questions that dealt with, and then you give some examples, and then I'm just going to put in real life again because we want to know, you know, how do your findings relate to real life? Okay, and so I have a couple of big paragraphs that I'm going to write here based on looking at the survey items and talking about how they apply, you know, to real life. And why is it that kids who don't have internet access in their homes, why are they less adaptable, and why do they have lower protective factor scores, okay? So this is the way you write a discussion. You start with the main findings, talk about how you came to the conclusion about this finding, right? And how does the main finding apply to real life? Okay, so there were a couple of things in the survey research example that I gave that can be talked about in the discussion section. All right, now the next part of the discussion section, I'm going to write limitations of the research. Okay, I'll just make this a bold subheading, okay? And then here, I'm going to talk about all the things that could have been improved in the study but weren't, okay? So I think there were 220, let me look at this, 232, okay? The sample size in the study was adequate at N equals 232 respondents, but what? You know, what is one drawback that maybe, you know, to the sample size. The sample size is good, but what is one drawback that might be based on sampling? The sample size in the study was adequate at 232 respondents, but the sample was only obtained in Puebla, Mexico. Okay, this presents one limitation due to geographical what? To geographical, what would you say? Specificity, I guess. Specificity. Okay. And what does that mean? Then you'll explain, well, we could have had samples from many different areas of the world during the pandemic to see if children, older children show more risk scores than younger children in different areas of the world, right? And then children who don't have access to the internet at home, do they also show adaptability and protective scores that are lower, all right? And this would be based across the world in different geographic regions. So you could explain all of this in the limitations, right? Okay, also, this survey was distributed online, and we are not sure if respondents gave, let's see, a truthful answer to each question that was presented, okay? If this was done in person, then we could kind of assess whether the people were telling us, the truth on the answers, all right? So you could go on and talk about that. Other limitations, you'll just have to pull those out as you think about your study. We did have 5 risk factor questions that were thrown out because they weren't reliable, but still we had, 34 questions that were reliable in the end, so that's not really a limitation. But let's say we gave a survey and we had to remove, 17 items or something like that. And so the original survey in that case was probably not constructed well. So you could put that in the limitations section, right? All right, and then future research directions is the third part of a discussion section. All right, here we're going to talk about, we're going to think in terms of the limitations of the study, and then we're going to provide directions for new research. We studied adaptability and protective factors and risk factors in this study, and they're based on a theory that we read about, and we could just do research that actually experiments with the behaviors of children in real life. So we could talk about doing research with children in vivo or in their homes to observe the real behaviors that they show. Do they show risky kinds of behaviors in the home if they don't have internet? Okay, what do they do? What do they actually do, when they have no internet during a pandemic? And what kinds of behaviors look to be risky? We could study that in a future study. So there are many things that you can come up with that would fit in this section of the discussion. Now again, just to recap, if you're doing survey research, A discussion section is going to look like this. All right, you'll talk about main findings, and then explain those main findings, and then how do they apply in real life. And then you'll hit the second main finding if you have one. You'll talk about that. You'll talk about in detail what the main finding means. And then, again, how does that second main finding apply in real life? And then you'll talk about limitations of the research and future research directions, okay? Now, after this section, after the discussion section, then you're going to have the references section start on the last page, okay? References. And here you'll write all your references for all of the studies that you talked about, either in the introduction or the method or somewhere else, okay? All of those will go in this last section. And then you'll be finished with your paper, okay? I would suggest in your groups, after the person who is charged with writing the discussion is finished, that everyone in the group look at this discussion section and make any kinds of edits or recommendations to improve it based on the results that you had in the study, okay? And since this is a group collaboration, it's good to have many voices that, you know, talk about and improve the discussion section in the paper, okay? Now, what do we do with experiments? I'm going to close this out now. And I have the results section from the experiment, the example experiment that we talked about when we were talking about results sections, okay? Now, in this one, this was about children's fading affect bias, but I had given an example on participants who were community members in the Philippines who had undergone a super typhoon event. And these guys were survivors of that super typhoon, okay? And so remember that the fading affect bias indicates that negative memories, the emotional intensity associated with negative events will fade over time, while the emotional intensity associated with positive events will stay pretty stable over time, okay? Remember that, and I reminded the reader that that was kind of the fading affect bias phenomenon, okay? And let's say we predicted that, you know, there'd be more fading in these memories associated with the super typhoon than in positive memories, and that's what we found, okay? And now we're ready to write the discussion for this paper, okay? So let me center the word discussion and bold it. All right, and we'll just start writing that. Now again, the main findings in this study, let's see, this, we don't want that to be bold. All right, the main findings in this experiment were that emotional intensity associated with an extreme negative event, such as a typhoon, a super typhoon, let me double space this. Should fade over time similarly to general negative memories that have been studied in many other research efforts. Okay, I'll just start with that. Okay. The main findings in this experiment was, I guess, main findings? The main finding, how's that? We won't make it plural. The main finding in this experiment was that emotional intensity associated with an extreme negative event memory, such as a memory for being a survivor of a super typhoon, should fade over time, similarly to general negative memories that have been studied in many other research efforts. Okay, and then we can talk about that. Why would a very negative memory, how would the emotional intensity of that experience still fade over time from the time it happened to now? Okay, I'm guessing that over time, people can build back their houses, build back their livestock, mourn the death of their family members who didn't survive the experience, and, bounce back and move on. Okay, we could talk like that in this paragraph. Mainly people are resilient and they will bounce back from very negative experiences. And so that's what I would mention in this description of the main findings and how they apply to real life, okay? Now, I'm not going to type all this out because, in the interest of time, I just want to kind of remind you that we talk about the main findings, we continue to talk about the main findings, and then how do they apply to real life, okay? And then we have the limitations of the research section. All right, and you can talk about whatever limitations there were, and then directions for future research. Okay, so again, we have these three sections of a discussion, okay? Now, we're coming to the end of this collaboration, the group collaboration. I want you guys to work very hard this week and next week to get the final paper done. Remember that you have a cover sheet with all of your group members' names on it. You have the introduction section with a number of sources that talk about the topic that you are going to research. Then you have a prediction section at the end of the introduction. Then you have a methods section with a participants section, a materials section, and a procedure subsection. And then after the method, you have the results section with all of the statistical information in it. And then you have this discussion section that I just described. And it has main findings, how they apply to real life, limitations, directions for future research. And then the last thing in your overall paper is the references section. And that's where you go back to your sources and you list all of the references in APA style in your paper, okay? All right, and Jackie this week is going to talk about your research presentations as a group, and so that will be the next lecture. And then we're moving into the final week where we ask you to submit the final research paper and also submit a video of your final research presentations, okay? All right, so this has been a great opportunity for all of you and for me to look at how groups collaborate internationally, okay? And it's really exciting. I know for me, but I know it is also for you. All right, thank you very much, and work hard to get all of these things done by the end of week 8. Thank you. Bye-bye.